Selamat sore Bapak Ibu sekalian. Acara akan kita mulai dalam beberapa saat.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will soon start our event. So we would like to request for you to ensure that your cell phones are on silent mode to ensure a smooth running event today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
Greetings
wabarakatuh.
and may peace be upon you.
Salam sejahtera untuk kita
Shalom.
semua. Shalom. Om Swastiastu.
Om Swastiastu,
Salam
Namo Buddhaya, message of
Selamat
kindness.
sore dan selamat datang di
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Stories to Watch Indonesia 2026. It is certainly an honor for me, Anggi, representing WRI Indonesia, to welcome all of the guests attending here today. And in this special occasion, please allow me to also greet those of you, such as our partners, our media partners, as well as WRI Indonesia colleagues who are joining us here at the WRI Indonesia office. Now, before we proceed with the round of introductions, I would like to give an opportunity for our presenters to come to the stage and take their seats. Pak Koni, Pak Fiken, Pak Arif, as well as Ibu Romauli, please feel free to take the stage.
Baik. World Resources Institute.
World Resources Institute was established in 2014 in Indonesia, and it is called Institut Sumber Daya Dunia in Indonesian. We are an independent institution that supports socio-economic development while ensuring that it's inclusive and sustainable. We are focusing on 5 global challenges: forestry, land use, climate, energy, cities, transportation, as well as marine. So for the last 12 years, we have contributed the achievement of Indonesia's national ambitions through collaboration with those leading the public and private sector, along with civil society organizations to turn big ideas into real action. So this evening, ladies and gentlemen, WRI Indonesia will discuss about what happens when economic development also considers climate change and also the climate. The narrative for Stories to Watch 2026 focuses on how systemic change in energy, cities, food, and natural resources can actually generate measurable co-benefits. And this is also shown by a more inclusive economic growth,
Peningkatan kualitas kesehatan.
reduced living costs, improved health quality, as well as the creation of employment opportunities. Stories to Watch 2026 will also take on this global theme and it will translate it into Indonesia's context by presenting various relevant and transformative stories at the national and also regional level.
Melalui semangat tersebut,
So, with this theme, ladies and gentlemen, we will now start the first session for Stories to Watch 2026. And we will be hearing about how Indonesia embarks on its journey towards a more sustainable Indonesia. And for those of you taking part in this session via YouTube, we also invite you to share your comments via the comment section. So without further ado, I would like to invite the Country Director of WRI Indonesia, Bapak Nirarta Samadhi, or who we fondly known as Pak Koni. The stage is yours, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Stories to Watch 2026. So every year, WRI Indonesia uses this forum to show various important stories about the direction of Indonesia's development. And this year, specifically, we have chosen to discuss something that may feel sensitive, but is very relevant. We would like to evaluate the agenda that is currently a public discussion, and we will also discuss the progresses in 2026 as well as the following years. Ladies and gentlemen, President Prabowo became our president in 2024 and targeted an economic growth of 8% in the 5 years. This is an extremely ambitious target. And allow me to share some history first. Since 1960, Indonesia has recorded an economic growth of 8% in at least 5 different periods. For example, in 1968, when we recovered from very high inflation levels. Afterwards, in 1995, Indonesia's economic growth was driven by the Asian financial crisis. Afterwards, the 8% economic growth was once again achieved in 1970s as well as the early 1980s, and it was supported by the oil boom. So we can conclude that the 8% economic growth was mostly achieved by relying on the extraction of natural resources. Now let's take a look at the current government strategy for economic acceleration. There are 8 key themes that are the focus for Indonesia's development. 2 among them are related to the agriculture sector as well as the downstreaming of mineral resources. These 2 sectors are known to be an intensive emitter of emission. This is both from the land acquisition, land clearance, as well as from industrial processes. Both sectors also have an adverse impact to air quality due to the pollution and also loss of environmental services from forests. As a result, we'll experience these adverse impacts on development as well. And as a result, the 8% growth will not be sustainable. So is this truly what we are aiming for? Ladies and gentlemen, attendees, and those of you joining virtually via YouTube, in this occasion, we would like to share some feedback and recommendations that is a result of our 12 years in Indonesia. Please also be mindful that WRI Indonesia is a think tank that collaborates with and also supports the Indonesia government's targets. We are not in a position to question the government's targets, nor are we here to criticize without offering solutions. On the contrary, we are using a data-based approach, as well as modeling and policy analysis. So all of these recommendations are backed by science-based research, not opinion. We would like to ensure that as Indonesia grows, Indonesia can also be sustainable, that is more resistant to long-term risks, and that creates a positive impact for the following generations. We would also like to bring you through 3 stories. These 3 stories are a very important agenda for Indonesia's growth. However, each has systemic consequences that we need to comprehensively understand. Because at the end of the day, our question should not be what is the most effective strategy to achieve this target. Instead, it should be how can this economic growth be sustained for years to come? rather than just for the short term. So let's start this discussion with an open mind, with a spirit of collaboration, and with an understanding that development and environmental protection are not two things that are at odds, but instead it should be designed to go hand in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with the topic of food self-sufficiency. President Prabowo has mentioned that food self-sufficiency is a must for our country. The government also is seriously encouraging improvements in this sector. There are timelines, there are commodity targets, as well as halting imports. The government is also determined to reduce food prices to make them more affordable for the people of Indonesia. If the chosen strategy is to have a large-scale food escape, the question is, how can we ensure its success without compromising the environment and public well-being? To discuss this theme, I would like to invite our environmental economist and knowledge generation lead from Koalisi Sistem Pangan Lestari, Romauli Pangabean. The time is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently facing a global crisis, and no country will prioritize the sale of essential commodities like food. This is a direct quote from President Prabowo Subianto's speech during his inauguration. Food has always been a key sector indeed for President Prabowo's leadership, and as such, food self-sufficiency is a priority. By 2029, Indonesia targets to be able to increase its rice production by 10 million tons. Food estates, also known as food production centers, are one of the key programs to achieve this ambitious target. The food security budget also continues to increase each year. And for the state budget of 2026, the budget allocated for this program alone reaches 34.38 trillion rupiah. This is equivalent to 51% of the food security expenditure of various ministries and institutions. Interestingly, the KSPP program is also distributed throughout all large islands in Indonesia with the exception of Java. This pretty much also aligns with the objective of ensuring equitable development across Indonesia's islands. Unfortunately, if this project is implemented in a manner that is similar as previous projects, its probability of success becomes very low. If we reflect from the 1970s to this day, almost all of the similar projects unfortunately have not been successful. Furthermore, if the program is managed in a centralistic and corporation-based management, equitable development, which is our main goal, will actually be increasingly difficult to achieve. If our food production method still remains the same as the status quo, we will actually just add a hidden cost to our already highly burdened food system. And what we are paying directly in the form of deteriorating health, environmental degradation, as well as socio-economic conditions. Why is that the case? Since the KSPP program involves clearing new land, it will actually increase Indonesia's emission levels, which definitely is not in line with our emission reduction targets. So the question is, how can we make KSPP better? KSPP can actually be brought closer together through the three aspects of development. KSPP can also assist in poverty reduction efforts and contribute to a more sustainable economic growth. This is also reflected by the fact that the agriculture and food sector still plays a vital role in shaping Indonesia's economy. This is also evident from the substantial contribution of the food sector to Indonesia's GDP, as well as the relatively strong growth of the agriculture sector, even during the pandemic. and it also directly contributes to the absorption of 1/3 of Indonesia's workforce. However, on the other hand, data shows that 2/3 of the poor households in Indonesia are still relying on the agricultural sector for a source of livelihood, especially for regions with high GDP contributions from the agriculture sector. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if we would like to reduce poverty while also building economic growth, KSPP can actually be an engine of growth as long as it is managed using a community-based approach that also optimizes on the optimizing degraded land. Our study also shows that there are approximately 3 million hectares of degraded land that could actually serve as an option for the KSPP program. So by utilizing these lands, clearing new land that will create carbon emissions can actually be avoided. Moreover, if we use an approach that is decentralized and that is community-based, the agriculture and food sector can actually drive the creation of 32 to 48.9% of conventional green jobs, and this will exceed the promised target of 19 million jobs that the government of Indonesia has stated. In addition to optimizing degraded land, achieving rice self-sufficiency also needs to be supported by the application of agroecological principles. This is to ensure that the agriculture production is aligned with the sustainable agriculture practices. And based on the modeling that we have developed, intensification with agroecological principles optimizes degraded land, and it is also supported by land protection. This was also certainly reinforced by Presidential Regulation Number 4 of 2025, and this can support the target of increasing rice production to 10 million tons by 2029 without having to clear forests. Rice indeed is still the key measure of food security for Indonesia. Nevertheless, we must not forget that we have various local foods that need to be developed that can also potentially meet our food demand. This is also very much in line with the development of eco-regional food systems as stated in the National Medium-Term Development Plan for the period of 2025 to 2029. Food self-sufficiency is indeed a common goal. However, the method to achieve it should ideally not increase the hidden costs in our food system. The various recommendations that we are sharing with you today are actually the first steps to support our country's journey towards food self-sufficiency without compromising nature, climate, and people. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Uli. That's an interesting analysis. For an archipelagic country like Indonesia, I feel that the decentralization of the food production would be most appropriate. The scale doesn't need to be too massive, and we can also utilize the existing land. This would be a win-win solution for food and climate. And by making a small change into its strategy, Indonesia will not only achieve its food target, but it can also contribute to the target of providing jobs and also initiating the expansion of equal employment opportunities. And we believe that this will be an extraordinary effort indeed. Now we will move towards Indonesia's energy self-sufficiency. We want to strengthen the national energy resilience, and the urgency of energy self-sufficiency in this case is to improve national energy resilience, reduce dependence on energy imports, and support sustainable development. The strategies taken are to also boost oil production, develop renewable energy, and to also convert vehicles to electric vehicles while also increasing biodiesel blends. Nowadays, battery-based vehicles are often found in the large cities of Indonesia, especially private vehicles. So incentives are indeed provided in the form of lower taxes. There are also many public vehicles, such as Transjakarta buses, that are also electric. And last week, for example, I also tried out an electric shuttle bus in Sanur, Bali, which is officially operational. This initiative is managed by the Intaran Traditional Village. They operate electric vehicles to transport tourists, hence making Sanur a low-emission area. But the true question is, will all electrification have the desired impact? And how can we ensure that this strategy supports economic growth as well as emission reduction targets? I would like to now invite my colleague, Made Vikananda, to present his analysis and feedback on where electrification interventions should be prioritized.
Thank you, Pak Koni. Other than food, the President Prabowo's administration also tries to achieve the targets of energy self-sufficiency in the next few years. The vision of energy self-sufficiency basically creates two very fundamental questions to all of us. First, how can we reduce our dependency on the import fuel that keep absorbing our revenues and put burden on our national budget? And the second one is how can we optimize the energy resources that we have? Let's discuss further about the case of diesel or solar engine fuels as an example. According to the data analysis conducted by the WRI Indonesia, it was found out that Indonesia has only been able to produce pure diesel fuel about 47% of the total consumption of the national diesel. The rest are still obtained from the imported fuels and also biofuel mix based on crude palm oil, which we also call as CPO. From this graphic, we understand that the government tries to continuously reduce the diesel import by increasing the mix of biofuel from B40 that has been designated towards B50, which in the long term will evolve into B100. Import has been reduced and domestic energy sources can be utilized. It sounds ideal, but let's hear our findings in this topic of diesel self-sufficiency. We developed a modeling that shows that if the government applies the biodiesel scenario until B50, indeed Indonesia will no longer be needing to import diesel fuel in 2026. However, the demand for imports will return to the same volume by 2030 and so forth, along with the increasing productivity and national logistics. On the other hand, we need to also take into account the CPO context, which has always been one of the flagship export commodities and Indonesia's source of revenues. The more CPOs are used for the biofuel at domestic level, some of the potential export can be reduced, hence creating the risk of reduction of revenues from the global market, which in turn will affect our national fiscal capacity. The data shows that the use of biofuel is not a long-term solution for achieving self-sufficiency in energy. We haven't even talked about the massive impacts in the form of deforestation caused by the expansion of palm oil plantation for biofuel production, and therefore the need for researching for more alternative bioenergies are still highly needed. Pak Koni has also explained in the beginning that electrification of vehicles is one of the solutions if the government would like to achieve energy self-sufficiency in the future. In discussions about vehicle electrifications, there is one sector that is often skipped in the public discourse, which is the national logistics system. The system is not really given sufficient attention while it is very absorbing in consuming the national energy. Although Indonesia is an archipelagic country, 80 to 90% of the national logistics system is still road-based, particularly utilizing the truck as transportation mode. Truck serves as the main driver of the food industry and consumption distributions of the communities. The amount is very small. Our national truck population is only 3.7% of the total national vehicles. And yet, talking about the impacts, our modeling found out that trucks contribute one-fourth of the national land transportation emission. Not only that, talking about the fiscal impacts, in 2024, the government spent more than 90 trillion rupiahs to subsidize 7.6 million kiloliters of diesel fuel. It's worth to remember that the diesel subsidy is 4 trillion bigger than the petrolite subsidies. In fact, truck absorbs most of the subsidies. The 440 trillion rupiah subsidy for diesel and gas fuel are equal to the investment values for operational subsidies for urban bus up to 175,000 units, which is such a big amount for fulfilling the needs for developing public transport in the urban areas. Addressing this problem, WRI Indonesia, together with the coordinating Ministry of Infrastructure and Development, supports the establishment of Indonesia Freight Decarbonization Accelerator, or IFDA. IFDA holds the vision to create a multi-stakeholder national platform to accelerate the adoption of low-emission goods transport in Indonesia. The objective is clear: reducing the dependency on diesel fuel, reducing emission, and supporting energy self-sufficiency within the framework of 8% economic growth. Then, what are the stories to watch from the sector of truck electrification this year? First, our research found out that the electric vehicles have the initial cost of 2 to 3 times higher than the diesel trucks in Indonesia. The cost is classical. The first one is the remaining high price of battery components. The second one is the fact that the national electric truck producers in Indonesia are still very limited, and we're still highly dependent on components from overseas. With the exorbitant price of electric vehicles or trucks in Indonesia, the business aspect this affects the business aspects, especially in terms of the adoption of decisions for business actors. Our studies estimate that the break-even point for electric trucks might take 1.8 up to 2.5 times longer compared to diesel trucks, especially without incentive from the government. Now, talking about the other important element, which is SPKLU, or the electric vehicle station, the government has managed to accelerate the development of SPKLU in massive scales. Data from the PLN shows significant increase of the number of SPKLU, or electric vehicle stations, in Indonesia. Over the past 4 years, the government through PLN has encouraged the establishment of 6,278 units of SPKLU in Indonesia. Unfortunately, the specifications of the electric vehicle stations that are built are not really suitable with the electric truck operational needs. In general, electric trucks require high voltage charging capacities to meet their operational needs. It's like a chicken and egg situation, whichever comes first. On one hand, the service providers are not yet interested in developing SPKLU for electric trucks due to the low demand. On the other hand, the industries are reluctant to buy electric trucks due to the number of infrastructures for recharging. The next problem is regulations. Unlike the 2 or 4-wheeler electric vehicles, the government currently has yet any roadmap and targets regarding the adoption of commodities or goods transport electrification, particularly the electric trucks. Without comprehensive regulations, Indonesia will find it very difficult to determine incentive or disincentive, as well as other instruments to support the electrification of trucks. Through IFDA, WRI Indonesia will continuously accelerate the development of inclusive regulatory frameworks supporting implementation acceleration together with the government, industries, and financial institutions. We appreciate the efforts of various stakeholders to keep doing experimentations and continuously develop ecosystem for the electric trucks amidst uncertainties and constraints in the field. We also convey our utmost appreciation to the coordinating Ministry of Infrastructures and Development for their continuous commitment and support in encouraging the decarbonization efforts of the national logistics system towards sustainable directions. WRI Indonesia is committed to support transition of the low-emission vehicles in Indonesia, not only to achieve the 8% economic growth, but also to maintain the national energy resilience to make sure that our growth continuously be sustainable and aligned with the development of human beings, nature, and climate. Thank you very much, and over to you, Pak Koni. Thank you, Vikan. I couldn't agree more. What Vikan presented to us, it is very clear that we should be focusing more on the electrification of heavy vehicles. For example, if the subsidies for the electric vehicles is given to the bigger vehicles rather than private vehicles, that would be better. The supporting infrastructures must be continuously developed and the regulations must be strengthened because the changes in the sector will contribute very significantly in the achievement of the energy sufficiency targets. Energy self-sufficiency is not only about replacing the energy resources with the new alternative. The more fundamental one is to reduce the needs and dependency since the very beginning. Without controlling the demand, replacing the existing fuel with biodiesel is not a solution, and in fact, it might risk to create new pressures on the supply chain, including in the form of deforestation. Now let's move into the last topic. Industrialization has become one of the key agenda of Indonesia's development toward 2045. The government has been encouraging the strengthening of the manufacturing sector to strengthen and accelerate the economic growth, creating employment and increase global competitiveness. The focus is clear: to develop a stronger industrial structure and one with more added values. However, industrialization also means the spike in energy demands, material demands, and potential increase of emission. And therefore, the direction of this policy becomes a key or important story to be monitored to check whether Indonesia will be capable to develop competitive industries and low carbon at the same time. I would like now to invite my colleague, Engagement Manager for Energy and Sustainable Business, Arif Utomo, to explain further about this. Thank you, Pak Koni. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia is ushering into a new development era when the economic targets and climate targets must go hand in hand. The statement of the Minister of Industries, Agus Gumiwang, reiterated that industrialization as one of the discourses in Indonesia's development must be planned to encourage economic growth and encourage sustainable environment and society's well-being. In the discourse of the national industrialization of 2025 until 2045, the government has been accelerating the industry's demand, which is triggered by the agenda of 8% economic growth, creation of employment, development of housings, and programs of the essential needs fulfillment. In the meantime, the industrial sector bears a very heavy mandate. The Ministry of Industry of the Republic of Indonesia has designated the target of zero emission in industry sector by 2050, which is 10 years faster than the national target, which is 2060. The commitment has positioned the industry not only as the engine of growth, but also as the front line of the energy transition and national decarbonization. The key message is clear. Low carbon economic growth is an absolute prerequisite because the damage of the environmental supporting capacity has hindered the economic growth in the long term. In this regard, the industrial sector holds a unique position as an economic engine as well as the contributor of emission that is quite significant. The manufacturing industry in this case contributes about 18.9% of the GDP and absorb 19.3 million workers. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, 34% of the national emission originates from the industrial activities, and 36% of the industrial emission come from the 9 most energy-intensive subsectors, namely cement, steel and iron, chemical industries, fertilizers, pulp and paper, textile, glass and ceramics, food and beverages, and automotive. Meanwhile, WRI's analysis shows that the demand for manufactured products is projected to keep increasing along with the expansion of economy and national development. In this regard, and especially in the business as usual scenario or without the significant decarbonization intervention, the emission of the 9 priority subsectors are estimated to spike up to 101% by 2050 compared to 2023. Or, it signifies an increase of approximately 153 million tons of the CO2 equivalent to more than 308 million tons of CO2 equivalent. This projection reiterates one important thing. Industrialization without energy transformation and green technology will accelerate the emission growth at a scale equally fast with the economic growth itself. Let's take an example from the iron and steel industry. According to the Ministry of Trade, up to November 2025, the balance sheet of iron and steel of Indonesia has marked consistent and robust surpluses. According to the Minister of Trade, Budi Santoso, in 2019, Indonesia still ranked 17 as the largest iron and steel exporting country in the world. However, thanks to downstreaming process and industrial capacity improvement, Indonesia has leaped up to the 5th rank as the largest iron and steel exporting country in the world. Indonesia Iron and Steel Industry Association and the World Steel Association recorded that the construction sector absorbed 77.1% of the total national steel consumption, followed by 11.6% from the automotive sector, as well as household utensils of 3.3%. The achievement of the trade performance shows that the iron and steel industry remains as a very strategic sector to determine whether Indonesia's export growth can go along with the decarbonization agenda. And therefore, the implementation of the decarbonization roadmap for the 9 priority industrial subsectors become crucial to ensure that industrialization can go hand in hand with the climate targets. Its implementation on the 9 sub-priority industrial sectors might reduce emission by 108.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2035 and 306.7 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. In the iron and steel industry, for example, the trajectory of decarbonization shows that the emission production will achieve its peak by 2027, whereas the emission from the final steel products highly depend on the emission of the raw steel production. And therefore, the success of decarbonization also requires transformation of the production process, including by substituting the fossil fuel to support the low-carbon production processes. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we firmly believe that the green industry ecosystem is highly needed so that our industrialization targets can run competitively and aligned at the same time with the zero emission targets in industrial sector by 2050. The ecosystem framework covers first, energy supply, material supply, and the supply of low carbon technologies that are affordable and reliable. Second one, the financing and incentive mechanism must be more diverse and easy to access. The third one, integrated industrial regulations and policies. The green ecosystem has started being established in Indonesia. The plan to generate electric supplies, or greener RUPTL, has set targets of 76% additional Indonesian power plants that should come from new and renewable energies. The Green Energy Innovations as a Service, or GES, starts to bridge the green electricity supplies with the industrial needs. Throughout 2025, the sales of renewable energy certificate through GES services have reached 6.43 terawatt-hours, or increased by 9.65% from the previous year. The buyers of REC are mostly local companies as well as multinational ones, with predominant customers coming from big-scale industries, especially coming from the manufacturing sectors, the sectors of mining, chemical, as well as pulp and paper. The volume of its purchases also vary, starting from 93,966 megawatt hours until 779,000 megawatt hours per customer in December 2025. In December 2025, about 55% of the total REC sales was absorbed by 10 customers with the largest purchase volume, which shows that the industry sector serves as the main driver in the utilization of the clean energy. Amid the ambitions of trade, industrialization, and expansion, Indonesia needs also to ensure that growth will not sacrifice the local communities by strongly committed to sustainability and taking care of the public health, living space, and the future climate that is always protected. Thank you. Thank you, Arif. I observed two key points in this issue. The first one is the fact that industrial decarbonization is key to increase Indonesia's product competitiveness in the global market. We must not be hesitant at all to implement the decarbonization roadmap in the industrial sector that we have developed, because it will ensure Indonesia's products to remain competitive, accepted by the international market, and protected from any carbon-related constraints. The second one, green industry is prerequisite for 8% economic growth that is sustainable. To the green industry ecosystem, Indonesia will reduce emissions significantly while maintaining its industry's expansion and supporting the creation of more jobs. In other words, the stable 8% economic growth and decarbonization are not two contradictory options, but rather two agendas that must strengthen each other. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our discussion, I would like to share with you a little bit about our analysis on the development strategies that undermine emission factors. We found out that there are at least three risks coming from the high emission development. The first one is that emission exacerbates the impacts of climate change. The agriculture and food sectors will be highly disturbed by this matter. The second one, poor air quality caused by pollution leads to poor health conditions, in turn reducing the community's productivity level and spiking the health service costs. The third one, the loss of ecosystem services due to the natural damage or destruction. This will create more troubles in the future with the poorer quality of air and the disturbance to the clean water supplies, as well as the declining quality of soil for planting. As a consequence, we will not be able to feel the benefits of 8% economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, of the three stories today, we can see clearly that Indonesia is currently on the intersection in its development directions. The growth of the 8% economic growth is a game changer. Indonesia's economy will enter into a new era if we can achieve our targets. But we need to consider the fact that we are living in the climate crisis era, the era of fluctuation of the global energy prices, and the era of the carbon market pressures. Now I would like to invite back all the resource persons, Uli, Ikan, and Arif, to join me to the stage, and together let us answer the questions from all of you. Both those of you joining us on site as well as joining on YouTube.
Ladies and gentlemen, joining us here in the WRI office, as well as those joining us via YouTube, we look forward to hearing from you as well. So please feel free to pose any questions, or if you would like to seek further clarification as well, that is completely welcomed. Okay, maybe I need to pose the first question first to trigger the discussion. So I will start off with a difficult question to ensure that we have an interesting and also warm discussion. So the first question will be for Mbak Uli. If, let's say, we have 3 million hectares of degraded land, what, in your opinion, will be the major obstacle to ensure that it can be a productive food estate? So thank you very much for the question. So first of all, we mentioned that we have various degraded land indeed. And in the project that we are conducting, we found that there are a number of areas in Indonesia that has a relatively large portion of degraded land. So it's more efficient to manage. This is available in Kalimantan as well as Sumatra. And it can actually replace the existing food estate that the government is also planning for Merauke. Now, your question was about what is the major obstacle. It would be to ensure the suitability of the land as well as the nutritional needs in that particular region. We need to ensure that there is alignment between the two. And as I explained earlier, one of the government's directives in this case is to also use an eco-regional approach for the food system. If, let's say, the islands in Indonesia are able to produce their own food, will we be able to fulfill the local food demand? And what we found is, for the case of Java, the production of rice will be sufficient to 2045. But unfortunately, that's not the case for the other islands in Indonesia. And the reasoning for this is because the local food in those other regions is not rice. So we cannot force all regions in Indonesia to also plant rice because it will not be optimal. For the case of the degraded land, we need to also identify what is the most suitable crop to actually cultivate. Will it be rice, or are there other types of carbohydrate sources as well? Because as we know, and I'm sure many of you also realize, that 51% of our daily calorie intake is actually fulfilled by rice. And the next question is about the nutritional needs of that particular region versus what we are cultivating. Oftentimes, there's a mismatch. That's perhaps because the MOA is working alone, the MOH, the Ministry of Health, is also working in silo. So there is a lack of coordination among the ministries. Let's say for the case of the coordinating Ministry of Food Affairs should ideally collaborate closely with the Ministry of Health, because MOFA is actually working on the forestry sector as well as with Bappenas, the National Development Planning Agency. When it comes to degraded land, we also need to study further about the costs incurred if we want to ensure that the land can be optimal and that it can support various crops. And this also includes identifying the soil conditions, the suitability of the land, as well as the costs required. And in our limited study, what we found was that if cultivation were to take place in the degraded land, the production cost will actually be lower. Moreover, if we consider the logistical aspects of things, it would be more costly if, let's say, we needed to transport from Papua to other regions. That's more or less the condition. Yes, moreover, if we consider the carbon footprint involved if we transport food from Papua to Java, let's say. Thank you very much for that elaboration, Uli. Any questions? Any follow-up questions, perhaps? Yes, please feel free, Ibu. This is an excellent event, so congratulations to WRI Indonesia. Please allow me to continue on the previous question, still on the topic of food. So Some argue that decentralization will be a more suitable approach. Can you elaborate further? Will the design still look like a food estate if that's the case? Like, will it still be monocultured? And are we still going to be overly focused on rice if that's the case? So Ibu Uli, for example, you mentioned earlier about nutrition. That is also interlinked with the health aspects, something that we have yet to discuss. We often discuss about nutritious food, and nutritious food actually lies on diversity. So have these topics actually been discussed? Because oftentimes when we're discussing about food affairs, it's only limited to boosting our rice production. Instead, if we would like to apply an eco-regional approach, we're dealing with high biodiversity. So we need to maintain biodiversity while also improving public health. So have there been discussions towards these directions? Now moving on to my second question. I believe a shorter supply chain would be ideal as well. Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Feli. That is indeed an intriguing question. Okay, with regards to the KSPP program in our modeling, that will also create way more than 19 million jobs. That is our calculations if things were done community-based. That would be higher as opposed to if a corporation-based approach were to be implemented. So that's what we meant by using a decentralized model. Now, nutritious food also lies in diversity. Ibu Felia, we have had discussions in the past, indeed. And for example, the government has this initiative called Isi Piringku, basically promoting diversity of food that you have on your plate. And indeed, the main concept here is to promote healthy food that is also low emission at the same time. And that means ensuring that it is local food mainly. So in one of our studies, what we're doing is to work in the district level. So we have studies in Pasaman district, and we are identifying the nutritious needs in Pasaman district. We also utilize the survey data from the national survey as well as from MOH. So we are basically identifying what local food are available there. But this is very costly because this is considered to be a relatively complex type of study. And maybe you're also wondering, why do we always focus on rice? Because the government is also focusing on rice when it comes to food security. And I know that in our coalition, we're also discussing about diverse local food in order to reduce emission levels as well. So we are doing this pilot in Pasaman district, and we hope to expand to East Java afterward. So by doing so, hopefully we can shorten the supply chain so that the approach can be more regional based. And by doing so, we hope to be able to reduce food loss and waste. And a research done by Bapanas in 2021, which WRI also contributed to, indicated that we generate hundreds of kilograms of food waste per capita. So this is a very high figure. Can you imagine that you generate food waste that is exceeding your own weight? And the majority of it is actually fruit and vegetables. On the other hand, there's also a trend of hidden hunger, meaning that we can actually carry out our daily activities, but we are facing micronutrient deficiency. So Ibu Felia, I look forward to discussing this on a one-on-one basis afterward as well. Thank you very much for the response, Ibu Uli. Okay, now Fikan, I think this will be an obvious question, but it will be worthy to delve further. So you mentioned that trucks only comprise of 3.7% of the total vehicle in Indonesia, but it generates large volumes of emissions. So, why is the government not tailoring its policies? Okay, I will try to respond to your question, Pak Connie, by actually linking it to the market. Because indeed, in Indonesia, EV is still something that was mainly initiated in 2019. It was started in the COP in Glasgow at that time, and Indonesia was committed to transition to EV. So I think the supply and demand basically is still geared towards private vehicles. And if we reflect on the conditions about 7 years ago, the adoption of EVs was mainly also supported by large manufacturers. And they are still very much geared towards private vehicles like BYD, Tesla. Moreover, the government's policies and regulations in the last 6 or 7 years also offer various incentives for the demand side. And only recently were incentives provided for the supply side or for the manufacturers. This is in order to boost the FDI, foreign direct investment. So all of these factors also contribute towards why we have more passenger cars when it comes to EV. However, we are also optimistic because, for example, the Transjakarta bus that we have, there are now like 400 electric buses operating for Transjakarta. And this is mainly supplied by local manufacturers. So this means that the supply is also catching up to this trend. And for the case of electric trucks, I think there is hope as well because there are an increasing number of manufacturers that are carrying out trials and that are engaging business actors as well to actually incorporate electric trucks as well in their supply chain. So we believe that the adoption of EV will be very much relying on regulatory support as well as the market itself. So supply and demand should ideally also encourage this trend. I have actually a follow-up question to that, if there is no question from the audience. So you shared a photo of Java, and you also shared about the distribution of the electric charging stations as well. I heard that there is also the initiative called Green Corridor. Can you elaborate further on that? So Green Corridor actually stems from our findings. And we found that in this transition towards electric trucks, there are indeed various challenges that we encountered. The two key challenges are to do with CAPEX, or the capital expenditure. For the case of trucks, it's still up to threefold of diesel trucks. Another challenge is that the demand does not sufficiently support this transition towards electric trucks. So demand in this case stems from us as business actors, as the users as well. So for example, buyers do not demand that their goods be transported only by electric trucks. So the Green Corridor aims to address this issue by, on the one hand, jointly promoting a greener infrastructure that can also support this transition. Because, indeed, from a CAPEX perspective, it is relatively challenging. But from an operational side, there are actually various cost components that can be covered by the government or supported by the government. For example, in our modeling, we found that actually the toll tariffs can actually become an important incentive to promote this transition, because the tariff applied for tolls are actually relatively high, especially for the case of the Trans-Jawa toll. So you can imagine if incentives were offered, for example, in the form of a lower tariff for electric trucks, then that could certainly be a driver. Another issue is with the electric charging stations. Maybe when you're going back to your village or your hometown, you go through the Trans-Java toll road, you'll find that there are various charging stations in the rest areas. But of course, the question is, will that be sufficient for trucks? I mean, not even discussing about the power and so on, but will the parking area even be sufficient for electric trucks? In this case, Green Corridor is a support that will involve cross-sector collaboration. So we need to jointly build an ecosystem that will allow us to prioritize infrastructure that can support this transition to electric trucks. I believe China and the US have also initiated this, so the government has provided infrastructure support and gave incentives as well, so that this transition can run smoothly, and we hope to be able to reduce the logistical costs as well. Okay, thank you very much, Vikan. Now, before collecting questions from YouTube, I would like to also give an opportunity to Arif. So, my question is whether the REC scheme will be able to actually promote structural transformation in the industrial sector, or is this just actually the initial stages? Thank you very much, Pakoni. I think the short answer would be that it's not sufficient. Now, with regards to the procurement options, I would like to offer 2 points of views. And this reflects on what we need at the moment. And we definitely need to appreciate PLN in this case. And we also have the Green Procurement Initiative as well. And this also includes unbundled REC, or renewable energy certificates. And there is a large uptake as well from the industry. In 2024, we also have GIAS, which is Green Energy as a Service initiative. The main difference is that in 2021, for the case of unbundled REC, mainly segregates between the green electricity consumption. But for GIAS, the industrial sector can actually bundle the certificate with their green electricity consumption. Now, why is this crucial? Because it will serve as a guarantee or evidence that there will be like a serial number applied. So this can be a way to mitigate or eliminate double claims from the same industry. So why am I saying that this is insufficient? Because if we want to transition, our survey actually indicates that the industry wants more. So this is very interesting indeed. And we are trying to do a survey as well. So the paper is currently being finalized, and we hope that this can be published in Q2. And from the 56 industries that we surveyed, they were seeking to have a more powerful impact instead. So there are various options that the industrial sector are expected. For example, physical PPA. These are the options that the industrial sector feel can better communicate their climate ambitions. Thank you very much for that, Pa Arif. Okay, what about from the YouTube participants? Any questions so far? Okay, if nothing, I'll continue to Pa Arif. Our discussion is becoming even more interesting. So yes, indeed, the decarbonization roadmap will be a key. My question is, how can we ensure that the implementation of the decarbonization roadmap can truly be implemented at the industrial level, meaning that it will not just be a paper document? So there are a number of key points, Pak Honi. This is to do with developing the decarbonization roadmap itself. So, WRI Indonesia and other partners are working together with the Ministry of Industry. In this case, we hope to be able to translate these major ambitions from the Ministry of Industry. We hope that the industry can transition towards net zero 2020. And the process is basically ensuring that we can produce like a roadmap. And the Ministry of Industry also hopes that this can then serve as guidelines. So we need to ensure that it is fully implementable. And this can be done by engaging the industrial sector in developing the roadmap itself. So there are 9 industrial subsectors that have been identified to have high emission intensity. In short, we are involving the industrial sector in our data collection efforts. This is to ensure that the input for the data modeling has sufficiently represented at least 50% of the market share for each subsector. And we hope that the existing data collected can also reflect the needs of the industry. And we hope that what we are modeling will also reflect the preferences of the industry. So there is quite a lot of checkpoints indeed, and this includes the technological options selected. So we are consulting once again with the industries as well as the technical directorates under the MOI along with industrial associations. So it has been a relatively long journey indeed, and we have been working on this for more than 1 year. And we have also communicated this as well in a public forum, specifically in the IGIS summit last year. We were working together with MOI in this case, and we are continuously refining this based on the feedback that we have received. Another way of ensuring that this can be fully implemented is through the plan of making the roadmap as a reference or input for the ministerial regulations. And we hope that this can then serve as a living document. So we will continuously evaluate the dynamics of the technology and so on. And we hope that the industry can also embark on its decarbonization efforts, because not all industries in Indonesia already have a transitional plan. So there are various industries that are trying to collect insights as well about the how-to. And we hope that this can then provide guidance as well. Okay, so this is a tripartite cooperation involving the industrial sector, think tanks, as well as the government. Yes, please feel free if you have a question. Moreover, for industries that are required to embark on this transition, and you mentioned that there are 9 subsectors. If I'm not mistaken, this includes cement, fertilizer, and so on. If I'm not mistaken, the government has a green industry sustainability initiative, which I think is in the form of a financing system, aiming basically to ensure that the industries will receive an incentive to accelerate their efforts. Because indeed, this is creating an additional burden on the industry. So how can we ensure that this can be sustainable, and how early can we implement it? If I'm not mistaken, this initiative is called GISCO. Yes, thank you very much for your question. So indeed, on the topic of investment, based on the simulation that we have done, the investment needs will be approximately 990 million US dollars. This is for the period of 2020 to 2025, and this covers the 9 subsectors. This is the amount needed to ensure that the decarbonization roadmap can be well implemented. So this is indeed a massive amount. And just as a disclaimer, as part of the 9 subsectors, there's also derivative industries. The current version of the roadmap unfortunately does not cover all of it, but we envision that there will be a very large investment needed. In this case, incentives as an enabler will be very much needed. And the MOI has also prepared a number of enablers. For example, GISCO that you just mentioned. And we also have the climate fund as well that we are preparing. Now, if your question is, what is the progress so far? Well, just last week, we have been communicating about the progress. And this is to do with the audit of the industry. So we're trying to identify the opportunities for decarbonization as well. We want to ensure that it can be matching with the roadmap, and we are trying to ensure that this is for GISCO as well. And this is actually an expansion as well of the existing mechanism as well. For ESCO, it is energy service companies. So the scope will be limited for energy itself, as well as energy efficiency. For GISCO, we will be expanding for anything related to green industries. In addition to that, we also have innovative financing schemes like GISCO, which have a unique function of aggregating the demand. And one of the bottlenecks is that the industrial demand is still relatively low compared to what the financing institutions are expecting. So GISCO, as a concept, should aggregate various industries, and then this will be channeled via the climate fund. So this is indeed something that we thought of. There are also other incentives as well that we are considering. And for example, what perhaps was already announced to the public is the plan for Indonesia to enable carbon or emissions trading, the ETS system. However, various efforts need to be done to ensure that the backbone for the MRV can sufficiently accommodate it. So this is also another study that we have also found from a study visit to China. And we are also closely communicating with our colleagues in the EU. So we are liaising with the MOI to ensure that each of these enablers can be tapped in by the industry.
That's right. Very much understandable. Perhaps when it comes to GISCO, we still need to do further studies about it. The initial target is to make it operationable next year, but we'll need to keep monitoring the progress, especially regarding the concept development as well as the entailing mechanisms. As for the emission or carbon trading, the pilot has been planned to be implemented in 2028. Still far away somehow, but I hope it can make Ibu Feli grows more curiosity, but it's going to be already a World War III by then. I happen to hold this microphone somehow, so let me ask a question. I'm wondering if we are talking about blended finance here. Yes, GISCO. Exactly. That's the blended finance, ma'am. Is it somewhat related to GCF? Or, if I may, allow me to give you some suggestions. What if we talk to Danantara? Perhaps we can expedite the process, because there have been a lot of examples, right? Blended finance, how they work. So the question now is how we can persuade the private sector, the banks especially, to the point that Danantara will be attracted to act as the catalyst so that the private sector funds can be invited to participate as well. That's an idea. I think we need to explore further about this idea. But I have a question, by the way, regarding the energy efficiency in the industry sector. Is electronic sector included into this one? No, it's not part of the industry sector, ma'am. Energy efficiency, such as AC, refrigerators, those are consumables that consume a big amount of energy and produce a lot of waste as well. If I'm not mistaken, the products that were imported to Indonesia are actually not energy efficient. So I think we need to conduct a study about this as well. Apparently, the electronic products that they import into Indonesia are the third-grade quality. So efficiency-wise, of course, we cannot expect too much from them. Very interesting, Ibu Felia Salim. We'll take note of your inputs and we'll try to follow up those inputs. Our team also collaborates with the GIZ team. The initiative's name is the Sustainable Energy Transition Indonesia, which do not only look into the industries aspect, but also the buildings, both the residential and public ones. So we'll dig deeper into that later on. In the building sector, they already have standards regarding the amount of energy intensity per square meter, and I think we can use that as a leverage to support your idea. Thank you. Time is running out. I see we have some questions from YouTube, but I cannot read that writing. It's too far away from me. All right. There are two questions from the YouTube channel. Thank you for the audience who posed the questions. The first one comes from Bimo. Bimo is a student, and his question is, does WRI think that the 8% economic growth realistic without high-scale expansion of natural resources exploitations? So this question is addressed to WRI Indonesia. That means I have to answer the question by myself. So what I mentioned earlier during the introduction, which served as the introduction to the other three stories that our colleagues shared as well, was the fact that 8% economic growth target can be achieved. What our forum, Stories to Watch, attempt to emphasize on is how can we still achieve the 8% growth without expanding our natural resources exploitation. I've already mentioned several examples. For example, what we need to pay attention more on, what kind of perspectives that we have to adhere to that are slightly different from the business as usual. So the answer is yes, we can. But again, what we mentioned earlier in this Stories to Watch, some of which have been proven by researchers, while some of our data came from limited researches. The modeling that we developed actually represented the conditions or the realities on the ground. But once again, modeling is also very limited to represent the real world situation. Theory-wise, we can say that we can do that, at least based on the model. And there are ways to achieve our targets. And that's why we try to communicate that option in this forum. And hopefully that answers your questions. The second question comes from Acep Durrahman. He's from a private sector, PT Karo Makmur Sejahtera. I think this should be yours, Pinkan, to answer the questions. So for the electric trucks, is there any collaboration with dealers or producers to disseminate about this information so that especially expedition companies can understand better about this? It turns out that Pak Acep comes from an expedition or delivery company. So my short and concise answer is yes, there has been collaborations, because this is basically the essence of our initiative or program, thanks to the support from WRI as well as the coordinating Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Regional Development. This collaboration aims to do some matchmaking between the demand and suppliers on the other side. We also work a lot with some partners that focus on service providers. There have been a number of initiatives for OEM to provide trial services, for example, in different companies to introduce their products. And that is one of our key pillars in IFDA. So for the gentleman from PT Karo Makmur Sejahtera, feel free to communicate with us. We are always open to all actors that share the same vision, which is to encourage transition towards low-emission goods vehicles. So if you're interested in converting into electric vehicles, we are ready to collaborate with you. Thank you, Pak Acep. So you have heard the offer from our side to follow up your concerns. Last question. During the presentation, we gave the ladies to start first, and the last question should be addressed to the lady as well. And this one is rather difficult question, so please pay attention. There was a graph showing the chronology starting from 1970s to 2025, all of which failed. Almost all, sir. Yes, almost all failed. If that's the case, what kind of policy designs that will allow KSPP to avoid the same big-scale food project failures like the ones in the past? What we found so far is that the very key point here is to listen to the researchers. Indonesia actually has had so many researches regarding which locations are ideal to be cultivated, but they didn't listen to them, or they just put it under the rugs, or maybe they didn't make a stories to watch event like this one today. But one thing for sure is that that should be the first assessment. Most of the projects failed because they didn't do any assessment regarding whether the locations were ideal or whether the locations actually needed cultivation and so on. And the second one, they didn't engage the local communities such as the indigenous communities and also the surrounding communities. While they are the key holders of the knowledge, especially about our local food. If we talk about sustainability, perhaps the practices done by the indigenous people have always been more sustainable than the ideas that we propose. They have the knowledge that have never been listened to. The third one, they didn't involve the women. In many cases, women suffer from the biggest impacts from any situations, such as, for example, in forest encroachment cases, the most affected ones are the ladies, because the women usually try to find their sources of food within the forest area. So when these big areas of land are cleared, they have to go farther to get food sources as well. Or, second one, foreign foods or non-local foods will get into their areas. Usually, those are sold by vendors on motorbikes, yes, such as instant noodles, right? I'm sorry, I must not mention any specific brand of noodles, right? That's right, instant noodles, let's call it. But food, the local communities that used to have a diverse amount of food varieties nowadays eat less and less varieties. For example, they used to eat colorful fruits and vegetables. Now they only eat one or two color vegetables. And they are somewhat forced to eat carbohydrates by design or by policies, such as rice, for example. Whereas, we know that certain locations were not used to eating rice for their carb supplies. So those are the things that we often skip. But I think it's somewhat unfair if I do not mention the successful stories. There are some successful stories, a DEM plot by ITB University, in which they managed to increase the productivity. How can we implement this in a larger scale? That is an important question, and therefore preliminary assessment in collaboration with researchers and stakeholders and local communities are crucial. Thank you. We have come to the end of this Stories to Watch session. Shortly, we'll break our fast together. I want to extend my appreciation to all of you for these enriching discussions. Thank you for the ladies in the front row who asked the questions, as well as those who post questions from the YouTube channel. An important lesson learned from our discussion today is the fact that it would be much, much more beneficial in the long term if we can ensure that our economic growth is an eco-friendly one, or what we usually call as the green economic growth. We need to achieve 8% economic growth by applying sustainable means for the sustainability of the growth itself and to avoid any hidden costs or externalities that might be caused to our health and environments. WRI Indonesia is honored to be able to provide you with recommendations that are based on science-based researches. Please utilize the data and use them in doing your transparent policy analysis. Once again, we don't give you any opinions. We come to you with data, with the commitment of supporting the government to achieve its targets. And we truly hope that we will have more time to discuss, to find the best strategies to achieve our national development targets. I believe that we have to conclude our discussion, and I can also reiterate that we are always open to all of you, and we look forward to receiving your feedbacks, inputs, as well as potential collaboration with all of you. Pak Acep is one of them, actually. Finally, I thank all the speakers and all the attendants of the participants. I wish you a happy breaking fast moment, and over to you, MC. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause for the stories to watch in Indonesia this evening. Please, everyone, rise. Let's take a group picture.